Customizing data virtualization. In this video you will learn how to integrate a Bisagi process with an external data source, configuring a Bisagi custom virtualization to retrieve information and store it into the process data model, or to send information to store it in the external data source. To illustrate this, we will use the following example. A bank has a product request process that starts with the registration of the client's information. Then, in the complete request activity, a supplier has to be selected to deliver the products. The bank already has a list of current suppliers whose information is stored in the ERP system. This information is required to be displayed in the complete request activity. Bear in mind that a new supplier can be registered or an existing one amended at any time. Therefore, using the custom virtualization functionality, information is retrieved on demand, and if it is amended, it is sent immediately to the external database. To retrieve this information of the suppliers, we will configure a Bisagi custom virtualization by manual definition using the standard method. Now, go to Modules View and select the Systems menu. Firstly, we have to create a new system to represent the real system which Bisagi will integrate. Therefore, select the New System option. A new window is launched. Enter the name of the system as ERP System and select the Enable Virtual Entities and Replication for this system option. Now click on the OK button to create the ERP system. In the ERP system, select Providers and then select New Provider in order to define the metadata needed to establish the connection with the external database. A new window is launched. Here we have to enter a name for the provider together with the specific Bisagi functionality that we will use. Enter the name as SQL ERP and uncheck the Enable Replication for this provider option. Check the Enable Virtual Entities for Provider option. Now select the Provider Entity and Library tab. By default, Bisagi can establish a connection with a SQL Server database or an Oracle database, but to connect to a MySQL database, we have to develop a component library following two specific software interfaces provided by Bisagi. In this case, the component is already developed, so we will review it. The component has to contain two classes as a minimum. One of them is a class that implements the software interface called iProviderVirtualDA. This is the class that has to implement the method and logic to establish and close the connection with the MySQL database as a general description. Note that all the methods that have to be implemented make reference to the data transportation. For this reason, this class has to be referenced to the data provider in the configuration of the custom virtualization in Bisagi Studio. Finally, please note that the most important method is an open connection. Also in this method we have implemented the logic of the open connection with the MySQL database, taking the values of the server, database, username and password from a general parameter given by Bisagi, and then with it establish a new connection. Now go back to Bisagi Studio to configure this component and the data provider class. Now select the New Assembly option. In the new window we have to enter the name and namespace of the component. Also, the DLL file of the assembly has to be registered and uploaded by clicking on the Select Assembly button. Click on the OK button to register the component. Now we have to make a reference of the data provider class in the registered component. Therefore, click on the New Class button. A new window is opened where we have to register the name of the data provider class of the component. Bear in mind that it has to be the same as the component class name. Click on the OK button to register the new class. In the new window, we have to configure the entity class of the component registered in the data provider creation. Before this, we need to understand the most important code of this class. Click on the Metadata button and configure the metadata of the database connection. Bear in mind that the names of the metadata properties have to be the same as the names in the component code, because when it is executed, Bisagi will take this metadata and send it to the component to establish a connection. Now click on the OK button to finish. Now select the Virtual Entities option within the provider created and then left-click selecting New Virtualization Class. In the new window, we have to configure the entity class of the component registered in the data provider creation. Before this, we need to understand the most important code of this class. The entity class is responsible for the specific queries over the external database. As in the data provider class, this also implements a specific Bisagi software interface. Note that it contains many methods, each one to execute a query to obtain or store information. One of the most important methods is getEntityInstance, so we need to understand how this method works. It receives 4 parameters: the name of the table to query, an array with the column names of the table to be used as a condition of the query, an array with the column values in the same order as the first array, and the last parameter is an array with the names of the columns to be selected in the query. These parameters are required to dynamically build a select statement returning the result of the query in a dataset. Bear in mind that you have to include the logic of the method, therefore you can manipulate the data as you wish. Also bear in mind that depending on the behavior of the attributes in the process, Bisagi will take the names and values and will invoke one of these methods accordingly. Now go back to Bisagi Studio to configure this class. Select the assembly previously configured. Click on the New Class button to register it. Type the name of the class CMySQLEntity. Now select this and right-click and select Add Entity to Virtualization. A new window is launched where we match the Bisagi entity to the external table by configuring the attributes used to identify each record as unique. Therefore, match the product provider entity with the suppliers table, then select ID number as the business key. A cache time put can be configured to specify the length of time the information will be valid in the process. When the time expires, Bisagi will synchronize it again when the information is used. When the time is set to 0, the information is synchronized every time that it is used. Now click on the OK button to add the product type entity. Here, Bisagi displays the entity's current attributes and their equivalents in the external source column. Right-click on the product provider entity and select Add Attribute to Virtualization to map each attribute with the corresponding column in the external table. In this example, the attribute name has to be related to the company name column of the external table. Bear in mind that we have to do this to each attribute that we wish to synchronize with the external table. Therefore, there can exist an attribute not virtualized of a virtualized entity. This means that in Bisagi it will maintain the attribute values just for the process. To identify which are the attributes not virtualized, try to add a new attribute to the virtualization, and the entity attributes not virtualized will be shown in the combo. In this example, we are not synchronizing the email attribute. This means that the values registered for the email of the suppliers will exist only for the product request process. This tutorial shows the configuration needed to integrate the process with an external data source by configuring the Bisagi custom virtualization. Thank you for your interest in Bisagi, the solution preferred by BPM experts.